In the swamplands of southern Louisiana lie marshlands covered up with cypress trees, muddy terrains, and interrupted by stagnant water. Considering this type of environment, the animals you'll be sure to see around include snapping turtles, copperhead snakes, cottonmouth, and different kinds of birds, mammals, and fish. However, another monster in this area lives in their midst: alligators. In the swamplands of Louisiana, there has been an estimated count of 2 million alligators. On the 23rd of August 2021, Hurricane Ida began building in the Gulf of Mexico before it finally made landfall. At that time, it peaked as a Category 4 hurricane, characterized by sustained winds of 150 miles per hour. By the 29th of August, it had gotten to the southern region of Louisiana and started to destroy anything that stood in its way. Thousands of residences were left flooded by the hurricane's storm surge, creating humanitarian and environmental disasters around the areas affected. In the midst of what was a devastating period for many people, in this region of Louisiana resides Tim Satterlee, a pillar of his community, where he volunteered as a cook during the disaster to help those who had no access to supplies and food in general. Tim did all this alongside helping the youth sports program. During a dreadful landfall as a result of Hurricane Ida, Tim was sheltering with his wife, Sandy Satterlee. This was in their home in East Slidell on Avery Drive in Avery Estate, which is settled right outside of Lake Pontchartrain, near New Orleans, Louisiana. Just behind the Satterlee home lies Big Branch Marsh National Wildlife Refuge. 18,000 acres of wild swamps and wetlands home to 100 different species of wildlife. As the storm blew over, their home, which was built above flood level on stilts, survived any form of disaster. But was the storm and its outcome the only disaster they had to fear? With the storm surge still high in Avery Estates, considering its low elevation, Tim still decided to go outside and check on their shed to make sure it was all okay. Almost immediately after, Tim's wife Sandy heard a splashing sound and quickly thought of her husband, who had just stepped out to check on the shed. Sandy feared that Tim must have fallen in the storm surge, so she did the first thing she could think of and ran out to check on him. Now, just behind the Satterlee's home was a marsh, and given the excess water from the storm, water had been rising quickly. So the marsh and the water from the storm had blended entirely together. The entire terrain had dramatically changed. Seeing that water had completely moved fallen trees and flooded the whole land area. And so, as Sandy came out with concern for her husband, what met her eyes was her husband in a horrific death roll with what seemed to be a 12-foot-long, 500-pound alligator. As Sandy stood there and watched in horror, the gator continued to roll and twist until it could successfully tear Tim's arm from his body. As the attack ended, Sandy immediately ran as fast as her legs could take her to her husband's side and started pulling him up to the steps of the house, and it wasn't until then that she realized the alligator had left one of his arms. At this point, Tim was unresponsive, and immediately Sandy knew she had to get help as quickly as possible. With no source of power or cell service to reach out for anyone to help, she went ahead and had the next idea she could think of, going straight back into the water. So she waded through the water with no idea or concern for where the gator was, and she got into the 𝗕𝗏𝗄. Sandy then went ahead paddling straight for their neighbor's house. Immediately after she got there, she put across a call to the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office and headed straight back home, even beating the first responders to her house. Upon arriving with the first responders, Sandy was hit with another shocking discovery. Tim's body was no longer where she had left him. Body just vanished. All that was left was a very large pool of blood. Apparently, the gator that had initially fled with Tim's arm had returned to reclaim his kill, almost immediately after Sandy had chased him away and gone out in search of help. However, this could only remain a claim until further investigations were made, and so wildlife authorities immediately began an investigation in a bid to locate Tim's body and the gator. Before they could freely label the incident a death, they needed to make sure that Tim was actually dead. And the reason that they needed to find the creature was to make sure that the animal that had eaten Tim never got the chance to kill and eat another human being again. So they decided to set up traps all around the area and wait patiently They were, however, clear on the fact that it could take quite a long time for a gator to find the bait of a trap. And there was a chance that the gator would most likely get away, even after getting to the bait. But they were ready to gamble their odds, even with the fact that there was absolutely nothing sure about apprehending the gator that ate Tim. 2 weeks passed. Wildlife authorities were still in search of the killer gator as they surveyed the wildlife refuge by drones to identify gators that they thought might have been the one involved in the attack at Satterlee's house. Soon enough, they located a giant, one that was over 500 pounds in weight and over 12 feet long, which was similar to what Sandy had described. Considering that this was the closest description to what Sandy must have put forward, they went ahead to sneak up on the gator to see if they were going to be able to get a good enough shot on the animal to perform the necessary examination. Luckily enough, they managed to pull off the findings they needed and went ahead to end the life of that killer gator with a single headshot. Now, considering the fact that a gator's brain, irrespective of the gator's size, is the size of an almond, it turned out to be the most difficult part of the gator's anatomy to hit. Their next line of action was to pull the giant man killer onto their boat and transport it back to the lab to complete a necropsy. As the gator was placed onto a lab table and cut right open, right there, with its gut open, chunks of human flesh were pulled out, coupled with parts of Tim's face that were still in shape. Looking at the entire remains of Tim Satterlee, it was clear that the gator was the culprit that they had been searching for. That it hunted, stalked, killed, and went on to eat Tim Satterlee whole. As that explains why it was very easy to make out his face elements. And to prove that the findings were even more accurate, a DNA comparison of the body and Tim's daughter's DNA was carried out, and it was well confirmed that the dead body was in fact Tim's. Even with the insane number of alligators that have been estimated to reside in the swamplands of Louisiana over the years, Tim's brutal alligator attack was recorded to be the first gator fatality of its kind in 200 years. In not just the southern region of Louisiana, but in Louisiana as a whole. However, and for whatever reason this happened, we may never know. But be rest assured that the giant man-killer gator is dead. Or at least one of them. Could Tim's brutal attack have been avoided if he was more cautious? Or once a giant-sized gator gets a fix, nothing can escape it? Tell us what you think in the comment section below. And also, don't forget to leave a like on the video, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more thrilling videos. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.